When Princess Catherine walked into the South Korean State Banquet on November 21st, 2023, people didn't just gasp, they screamed. Online, anyway. Because sitting on her head was a tiara that nobody, and I mean nobody, had seen worn in nearly a century. The Strathmore Rose, a wreath of wild roses made permanent in diamonds and silver. Delicate as morning frost, layered petals that looked like they were actually growing. Royal jewelry experts who had spent decades cataloging every gem in the British collection admitted they'd never seen this piece worn in their lifetimes. Some thought it was new. Others wondered if it had been secretly commissioned. But the truth? Far more tantalizing. This tiara hadn't been worn publicly since the 1920s. And that's when it hit everyone watching. Something has changed. Something fundamental. King Charles III has done what his mother never did. He's thrown open the vault doors, and the people inside are absolutely loving it. So let's talk about what's really happening here. Because this isn't just about pretty jewelry. This is about a character shift in the monarchy itself. A new king with a fundamentally different philosophy about what these treasures are for. To understand why Charles's approach feels so revolutionary, you first need to understand what he inherited. Not just the crown, not just the palaces, but vaults, plural, containing one of the most extraordinary accumulations of jewelry in human history. And the woman most responsible for filling those vaults? Queen Mary. Born Princess Victoria Mary of Teck in 1867, Mary became queen consort to George V in 1910 and immediately set about acquiring jewelry with what can only be described as obsessive determination. She didn't just accept gifts gracefully, she actively pursued pieces. She made it known when she admired something. She pressured families to sell or gift heirlooms. She attended estate sales with purpose. She commissioned new pieces constantly, working with Gerard and other jewelers to create tiaras, necklaces, and brooches that reflected her vision of what a queen should wear. The Cambridge Emeralds, the Vladimir tiara, the Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, the Delhi Durbar parure. Piece after piece after piece, acquired over decades, each one carefully catalogued and preserved. By the time Queen Mary died in 1953, she had assembled a jewelry collection that would have been the envy of any museum in the world. And she left most of it, not to individual family members, but to the crown itself, ensuring that future generations would have access to her glittering legacy. The vaults filled, and filled, and filled some more. Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, added her own pieces when she died in 2002 at age 101, including the Strathmore Rose that would remain unseen for another 2 decades. Princess Margaret's collection entered the mix after her death the same year. Gifts from foreign governments accumulated, wedding presents, coronation commemorations, state visit offerings. By the time Elizabeth II died in September 2022, the British royal jewelry collection had grown so vast that no one person could possibly wear all of it in a single lifetime. Tiaras numbered in the dozens, brooches in the hundreds, necklaces, earrings, bracelets, enough to fill room after room in the vaults beneath Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle. And Elizabeth, for 70 years, kept most of it locked away. This wasn't cruelty, wasn't selfishness. It was philosophy. Elizabeth believed these tiaras and necklaces and brooches weren't merely beautiful objects. They were symbols of institutional continuity, pieces connecting the present monarchy to Queen Victoria, Queen Mary, Queen Alexandra. She treated them accordingly, which meant stunning treasures spent her entire reign in velvet-lined cases, seen by no one beyond the occasional conservator who dusted them once a decade. Think about that for a moment. 7 decades. That's longer than most people live, And during all that time, entire categories of royal jewelry simply existed in darkness, waiting. Under Elizabeth, vault access operated on a strict hierarchy of proximity and purpose. The monarch herself had complete access, naturally. She exercised it selectively, rotating through maybe a dozen favorite tiaras over the course of her reign, while leaving dozens more in storage. Beyond her immediate circle, loans were rare, deliberate, loaded with meaning. When Elizabeth lent the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara to Princess Diana, it was understood as a significant gesture of acceptance. When she allowed Catherine to wear the Cartier Halo tiara at her 2011 wedding, it represented formal welcome into the family. These weren't just jewelry decisions. They were statements about belonging. But the operative word was allowed. Elizabeth decided what emerged and when. Period. Full stop. No negotiations. Tiaras that Queen Mary had worn in the 1920s and 1930s stayed in the 1920s and 1930s, preserved but unseen. Necklaces that had dazzled Edwardian ballrooms sat untouched in their cases. The vaults beneath Buckingham Palace and Windsor Castle became a kind of time capsule, extraordinary in their contents, but largely closed to the present day. She seemed to believe these treasures would have their moment again someday, with some future monarch. That future arrived on September 8, 2022, and it brought a fundamentally different philosophy. When Elizabeth died at Balmoral, Charles became king at 73 years old, the oldest heir to ascend to the British throne in history. He'd waited longer than any previous Prince of Wales for this moment. Decades of waiting, decades of preparation, decades of watching his mother preside over a collection he couldn't touch. The waiting seemed to have shaped his sense of urgency. From the earliest days of his reign, observers noticed a different energy, a monarch determined to make his mark quickly and visibly, rather than simply continuing his mother's approach. Some called it impatience, others called it wisdom. The understanding that at 73, time is not infinite, and treasures kept in darkness serve no one. Charles made a choice, a conscious, deliberate choice about what kind of king he wanted to be when it came to the family's most dazzling possessions. He chose generosity. The jewelry started appearing almost immediately. November 2022, just 2 months after Elizabeth's death, Charles and Camilla hosted their first state visit as King and Queen Consort. President Cyril Ramaphosa of South Africa came to Buckingham Palace, and the state banquet that followed offered the first glimpse of what Charles's reign might mean for the royal collection. Camilla appeared wearing the Delhi Durbar Parure, a suite of emeralds and diamonds that included a substantial brooch created for the Great Imperial Ceremony in India in 1911. Queen Mary had commissioned several pieces for that event, and many had rarely been seen since her death in 1953. That Camilla was wearing one of them, just weeks into Charles's reign? That was a signal. Charles was opening the vaults, and he was starting with his wife. Then came the coronation on May 6, 2023. It formalized both Charles's position and Camilla's access. She was now Queen Consort, highest-ranking woman in the British monarchy, and the jewelry that followed confirmed her new status. At the state opening of Parliament, she wore the George IV state diadem, that iconic diamond-studded band that curves across the forehead, the same piece Elizabeth II had worn for decades on coins and stamps. Seeing it on Camilla's head was a visual declaration. This is the Queen Consort now. At subsequent events, the pattern continued. The Girls of Great Britain and Ireland tiara, affectionately known as Granny's tiara, because Elizabeth had worn it more than any other piece, appeared on Camilla at the Mansion House dinner in October 2023. She wore it with evident comfort, a piece that had been so associated with Elizabeth that seeing it on another head felt almost startling. Royal watchers started describing Camilla as having been given the run of the vaults, And that phrase captured something true about the new dynamic, where Elizabeth had kept even trusted family members waiting for certain pieces. Charles appeared to have presented Camilla with a set of keys and encouraged her to enjoy herself. Explore, discover, wear what moves you. She is loving it, obviously. The contrast between her jewelry as Duchess of Cornwall, limited primarily to pieces from the Greville bequest, and her jewelry as Queen Consort, is so stark, it functions almost as a before and after demonstration. This is what happens when the vault doors swing open. This is what happens when a king decides that treasures should be worn, not preserved in darkness. But here's what makes Charles's approach even more interesting. If Camilla's expanded access could be attributed to her new status as Queen Consort, that South Korean State Banquet proved Charles's generosity extended much further. Catherine walking in wearing the Strathmore Rose wasn't just a fashion moment. It was a statement about the younger generation's place in this new jewelry landscape. Let me tell you about this tiara, because its history matters deeply, and it reveals just how far Charles is willing to reach into the vaults. The Strathmore Rose traces back to the 1920s, when it was created for Cecilia Bowes-Lyon, Countess of Strathmore and Kinghorn. She was the mother of the woman who had become Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, which means this tiara connects to one of the most beloved figures in modern royal history. Its design is distinctly Art Deco, naturalistic rather than geometric, featuring wild roses that give the piece an organic beauty quite different from more structured tiaras of earlier periods. The young Elizabeth Bowes-Lyon wore this tiara before her marriage to the Duke of York in 1923. During her years as a society beauty in the Scottish aristocracy, it would have glittered at country house parties and grand balls. After she became Duchess of York and eventually Queen Consort to George VI, she continued wearing it occasionally. But by the middle of the 20th century, it had faded from public view entirely. When the Queen Mother died in 2002 at the age of 101, much of her jewelry passed into the broader royal collection. The Strathmore Rose vanished into the vaults. For decades afterward, tiara enthusiasts knew of its existence only from a handful of historical photographs. There was no expectation it would ever resurface. Many assumed it had been cannibalized for parts, diamonds reset into other pieces, its form lost to time. Nobody expected the Strathmore Rose to resurface, ever. And then, Charles decided otherwise. He reached into the deepest chambers of the family's holdings and emerged with something no one alive had seen worn. He gave it to Catherine for a Tuesday night dinner in November 2023. Think about what that choice reveals about Charles. He could have kept this tiara in the vault for another century. He could have saved it for some distant future coronation. He could have done what his mother did and let it sleep in darkness indefinitely. Instead, he handed it to his daughter-in-law and said, "Wear this." Charles is 75 years old. William is the future. Catherine is the future Queen Consort. By lending her pieces like the Strathmore Rose, Charles is doing something his mother rarely did, building relationships with the next generation through jewelry. He's saying, "These treasures are yours too. Start wearing them now. Make them your own." That's generosity with purpose. That's a king thinking about legacy. But not everyone in the family operates this way. Consider Princess Anne. Charles's only sister has spent her entire adult life as one of the hardest-working members of the royal family. Year after year, she tops the engagement counts. She travels constantly. She shows up, does the work, and goes home. No drama, no headlines, no fuss. She is, by any reasonable measure, the most reliable royal of her generation. And her jewelry? Unchanged. Decade after decade after decade. Anne wears the same pieces she's always worn. her wedding tiara from 1973, the aquamarine brooch that belonged to her grandmother, a rotation of pins and earrings that royal watchers could identify from across a crowded room. She has access to the vaults. Charles would certainly lend her anything she asked for, but she doesn't ask. She doesn't want new tiaras. She doesn't want to explore. She's perfectly content with what she has. This is fascinating because it reveals something important about Charles's generosity. It requires a willing recipient. Charles can throw open the vault doors. He can encourage exploration. He can make pieces available that haven't been seen in generations. But he cannot force anyone to walk through those doors. Camilla walked through eagerly. Catherine walked through gratefully. Anne? Anne stayed exactly where she was. This isn't criticism of Anne. Her consistency is part of her brand, part of what makes her beloved. But it does highlight that Charles's shift in policy isn't universal in its effects. Some royals will take advantage of the new access, others will politely decline. Which brings us to Sophie. Sophie, Duchess of Edinburgh, exists in a peculiar jewelry limbo that the royal watching community has noticed with increasing frequency. She was Countess of Wessex until March 2023, when Prince Edward was elevated to the title Duke of Edinburgh, which had been held by his father, Prince Philip, and she became Duchess. That's a significant promotion in title. But did her jewelry access change along with it? Here's what makes Sophie's situation worth examining closely. She is, by any measure, one of the hardest-working royals in the family. In a typical year, Sophie undertakes hundreds of official engagements. Some years, she's completed more than any other member of the family except for Princess Anne. She represents the crown at events around the world. She's taken on difficult causes, blindness prevention, sexual violence in conflict zones, and done so with quiet dignity rather than seeking headlines. She's been married to Prince Edward since 1999. That's over 25 years of service to the institution. 25 years of showing up. 25 years of putting on the tiara, the same tiara, over and over again, and representing the family at formal events. And what tiara has she worn for most of those 25 years? Her wedding tiara. A delicate floral piece with anthemian elements that she received upon her marriage to Prince Edward. Lovely, yes. Elegant, certainly. But so frequently worn that observers began wondering if she had access to anything else. She occasionally wore the Wessex aquamarine necklace tiara, which can be configured as both a necklace and a headpiece. A clever piece, but not one of the major tiaras from the royal collection. State banquet after state banquet, Sophie appeared in the same piece, while Catherine rotated through the Cambridge lover's knot, the lotus flower, and now the Strathmore Rose, while Camilla moved from piece to piece, exploring the depths of the collection. Sophie wore her wedding tiara. Again. And again. And again. Why hasn't Charles extended the same generosity to Sophie that he's shown to Camilla and Catherine? This is genuinely puzzling. The conditions seem favorable. Charles has demonstrated willingness to unearth pieces forgotten for decades. He's shown he values visible recognition for working royals. Sophie has earned her place through 30 years of steady service, longer than Catherine has been in the family, longer than Camilla was married to Charles before he became king. Is it a blind spot? Charles focusing on his wife and his heir's wife, perhaps forgetting that his brother's wife has been working just as hard for just as long? Is it a matter of Sophie not asking, like Anne, content with what she has? Is there some family dynamic at play that outsiders can't see? The honest answer is, nobody knows. But what we do know is that each state banquet Sophie attends, each formal event where tiaras are appropriate, carries the possibility of a breakthrough. Under Elizabeth, her limited access seemed permanent, a reflection of her position in the hierarchy rather than any failing on her part. Under Charles, the rules have clearly changed for others. Whether they'll change for Sophie remains one of the most compelling open questions in royal jewelry watching today. But now we arrive at the question burning brightest, the one that touches something deep about Diana's legacy and Catherine's future. Whatever happened to Diana's sapphire and pearl choker, and might Charles's new generosity finally bring it into the light? The choker in question is one of the most instantly recognizable pieces from Diana's collection. A 7-strand pearl necklace anchored by an enormous oval sapphire surrounded by diamonds. Unforgettable, distinctive, pure Diana. But here's what many casual observers don't realize. This choker didn't begin its life as a choker at all. It started as a brooch. A gift from the Queen Mother to Diana upon her engagement to Prince Charles in 1981. The sapphire and diamond brooch was substantial but conventional, the sort of piece a young princess might pin to a lapel or a dress bodice. Traditional, expected, safe. Diana, however, was never conventional. Sometime in the mid-1980s, she took the brooch to Gerard, the crown jewelers. Gerard had served the British royal family since Queen Victoria appointed them in 1843. They'd created coronation crowns, royal tiaras, pieces of extraordinary significance. They knew what royal jewelry was supposed to look like. Diana asked them to make something that didn't look like that at all. She wanted them to transform the brooch into something unprecedented, a choker clasp. They attached it to 7 strands of perfectly matched pearls, creating a piece that sat high on Diana's throat and drew the eye immediately to that extraordinary blue stone. The pearls weren't just any pearls. They were matched for size, color, and luster, hundreds of them strung in those 7 elegant rows. The result was pure Diana, traditional materials reimagined into something modern and daring. A statement that respected royal convention while utterly subverting it. She'd taken a sweet engagement gift from her grandmother-in-law and turned it into something that made headlines. Diana wore this choker to some of the most significant events of her life. November 9, 1985, the White House state dinner hosted by President Ronald Reagan. This was the event of the decade. Diana and Charles visiting America, staying at the White House, attending a dinner with Hollywood royalty alongside political royalty. That very evening, the one where she danced with John Travolta in what became one of the most photographed moments of the 1980s, the sapphire choker gleamed at her throat throughout. She wore a midnight blue velvet gown by Victor Edelstein, and that sapphire picked up the blue of the dress perfectly. The images went around the world. Diana dancing, Diana laughing, Diana with that choker catching the light. She wore it to the America's Cup Ball in 1986, to gala dinners throughout the late 1980s. It became one of her signature pieces. Unlike many royals who rotated constantly through their jewelry collections, Diana had favorites, pieces she returned to again and again because they worked for her, because they meant something to her. The sapphire choker was clearly one of those favorites, but Diana wasn't finished surprising people. In 1994, she appeared at an event wearing the choker not around her neck, but across her forehead. Like a flapper's bandeau from the 1920s. The image was so striking, so unexpected, that it earned its own nickname, the Elvis look, a reference to the dramatic headwear that had been popular in certain entertainment circles. Think about what that required. The confidence to take a piece everyone recognized, a piece associated with her most iconic moments, and wear it in a completely different way. The creativity to see the possibility, the fearlessness to actually do it, knowing people would talk. That was Diana, always. She had taken a piece that was already a creative transformation, brooch to choker, and transformed it again, demonstrating that jewelry could be performance, could be rebellion, could be self-expression. When Diana died in that Paris car crash in August 1997, her personal jewelry collection passed, according to her will, to her sons, William and Harry. The terms were clear. Her jewelry would eventually go to her daughters-in-law. She wanted her treasures to continue forward, to be worn by the women her boys would love, to connect generations. This is how Catherine came to wear Diana's sapphire engagement ring. William proposed with it in 2010, saying he wanted his mother to be part of his happiest moment. It's also how Meghan Markle came to possess certain pieces, including a distinctive aquamarine ring that Diana had loved. But the sapphire choker has never appeared again, not once in nearly 30 years. The mystery deepens when you consider how deliberately Catherine has referenced Diana's jewelry legacy throughout her time in the royal family. She wears the engagement ring at nearly every public appearance. She's worn the Cambridge Lover's Knot tiara, Diana's favorite headpiece, to numerous state banquets. She's been photographed in Diana's pearl earrings, Diana's 3-strand pearl bracelet, Diana's sapphire and diamond earrings. The connection is ongoing, intentional, and clearly meaningful to Catherine herself. She understands the symbolism. She knows what it means to Diana devotees when they see those pieces emerge on a new princess. She makes these choices deliberately. And yet the sapphire choker, perhaps the most distinctive piece Diana ever wore, remains absent. Here's what we know with confidence. The choker was Diana's personal property, transformed at her own expense from a brooch given by the Queen Mother. Upon her death, it passed to her sons according to her will. It has not been worn publicly since August 1997. That's nearly 3 decades of silence. Here's what we believe but cannot confirm. The choker is presumed to be in William's possession as part of the jewelry intended for his wife. It has not been publicly displayed, photographed, or referenced by any member of the royal family since Diana's passing. Here's what we genuinely do not know. Whether the piece required restoration after nearly 3 decades, pearls are organic after all, and can deteriorate if not properly maintained. Whether any private agreement divided Diana's jewelry in ways that complicate the choker's status. Whether Catherine has chosen not to wear it for personal reasons. Whether William has asked her to wait for some particular occasion. Whether there's any institutional consideration regarding a piece so strongly associated with Diana's most iconic moments. These are real questions, with no public answers. And here's informed speculation. The sapphire choker remains one of the most significant pieces of Diana's personal collection. Its reappearance would generate enormous attention. Front pages around the world, endless analysis, emotional reactions from people who still remember Diana vividly. Catherine has demonstrated repeatedly that she understands the power of Diana references and deploys them strategically. If she hasn't yet worn the choker, it may be because she's waiting for a moment of sufficient magnitude, something that would justify unveiling a piece this emotionally charged, something where the attention would be welcome rather than distracting. There's also a practical consideration. The choker is physically distinctive in a way that limits its versatility. It sits high on the throat, requiring a specific type of neckline, either a deep décolletage or an off-shoulder design, to be shown properly. Not every state banquet gown would accommodate it. Catherine may simply be waiting for the right dress as much as the right occasion. And there's the question of Charles's influence, even though he doesn't control this piece directly. Remember, the sapphire choker was Diana's, not the crown's. It's personal property, held by William. Charles doesn't decide whether Catherine wears it, but the environment Charles has created, the generosity, the vault doors swinging open, the sense that beautiful things should be worn and enjoyed rather than preserved in darkness, that environment changes everything. Charles has established a precedent. Treasures should emerge. Beautiful things should be seen. The past should connect to the present through jewelry worn and enjoyed, not locked away and forgotten. Catherine's status within the family has never been higher, particularly following her public health journey in 2024 and the outpouring of support that accompanied it. The emotional wounds of Diana's era, while never fully healed, have softened with time. The younger generation knows Diana primarily through jewelry and fashion, through the romantic story of the ring William used to propose. If there was ever a moment when that 7-strand pearl necklace, with its magnificent sapphire, might emerge from storage and catch the light once more, it's now. Under this king, in this era. So here's what to watch for. State banquets are the main stage for royal jewelry. They're the events where tiaras are required, where the most significant pieces emerge, where cameras capture every detail. Every upcoming state visit is an opportunity for something spectacular to appear. Watch for Catherine in an off-shoulder gown. Watch for Sophie in something other than her wedding tiara. Watch for Camilla continuing to explore the depths of what Queen Mary accumulated all those decades ago. Charles has changed everything about how the vaults work. He's generous where his mother was restrictive. He's eager to see treasures worn rather than preserved in darkness. He's given Camilla the run of the jewelry collection. He's trusted Catherine with pieces that hadn't seen light in nearly a century. The sapphire chokers sit somewhere, in a safe, in a vault, waiting. 7 strands of pearls, 1 extraordinary sapphire. A transformation that was pure Diana. And if the question is whether we might finally see it again, under this king, with this philosophy, for this princess, the conditions have never been better. Not in 30 years. Subscribe for more stories like this.